Welcome back to Third Phase of Moon. Blake Cousins here. We're here with Michael Schratt in Los Angeles. We met with him for a few hours today, and he broke down some incredible information. And we're going to share it with you right here at Third Phase of Moon. If you're into historical evidence, well, Michael Schratt has the information, and we're excited that we're bringing it to you. So buckle up, everybody. Enjoy this interview. Tell me the significance of the Blue Room at Wright-Patterson.
Okay, so when we talk about UFO crash retrievals, there's two things to keep in mind. Number one, you're not going to read about it in your local newspaper because UFO crash retrievals represent the crown jewels of the government, and they're just not going to give away the crown jewels because you're talking about the bodies, the craft, the debris, the autopsy reports, the autopsy photographs, the 8x10 glossy black and white. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, it definitely appears that all roads lead to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. We'll talk about the Blue Room, in a minute here, but that is the alleged location of where the bodies and the debris really started funneling in, vintage 1947 time frame, so we can get into it.
So these, the Blue Room, specifically what crash and retrieval, where did these bodies come from in the craft? Was it the 1947 crash?
Well, it's alleged that the Roswell crash, July 2nd, 1947, went there, and then again, we have the Kingman 1953 crash. There's some evidence to indicate that the 48 Aztec craft was sent to Los Alamos, but then perhaps was later moved to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base because they have the aeromedical lab there, they have the Foreign Technology Division there. So again, all roads appear to lead to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
So tell me the significance of this paperwork
Sure.
right here that you brought.
Sure. Barry Goldwater was definitely a very big UFO proponent. He had a large collection himself. These were procured from the ASU Historical Archives Department. I've got basically all of the Barry Goldwater documents here. We won't read them all, but just to go over a really quick one here.
To clarify, that's the original document,
right?
Right?
These are copies of the original document from the ASU library, correct, from the archives. Okay, so this is dated October 19th, 1981. This is Barry Goldwater here, and it says, "First, let me tell you that I have long ago given up acquiring access to the so-called Blue Room at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, as I have had long string of denials from chief after chief, so I have given up. In answer to your question, one is essentially correct. I don't know of anyone who has access to the Blue Room, nor am I aware of its contents, and I am not aware of anything having been relocated. I can't answer your question 6. In fact, I can't find anyone who would answer it. To tell you the truth, this thing has gotten so highly classified, even though I will admit there is a lot of it that has been released. It is just impossible to get anything on it." So if there's nothing to UFOs, then why can't we get access to the Blue Room? Why can't we get access to that information? All of the documents, all of the blueprints, all of the 8x10 glossy white photographs, all the motion picture film reels. So we keep on hearing these alleged repositories for UFO crash retrieval in bodies. So we've got Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, we've got Langley Air Force Base, we've got Homestead Air Force Base, we've got MacDill Air Force Base, Tampa, Florida. So it appears is that they don't keep this information tied up in just exactly one location, but there are multiple repositories. Well, the next case comes from my good friend Mark McCandlish. He's no longer with us, but his legacy will continue on. There's no doubt that Mark was the premier aerospace illustrator of the world. There really is no one better than Mark McCandlish. So the next case comes from him. He was at an air show, this is 15, 20 years ago, and there was a B-24 Liberator there. There was a pilot there that was a B-52 pilot in 1966 during Vietnam. And he relayed this story to Mark, and then Mark told it to me. This is for an Orange County MUFON presentation that Mark had done. So the story being 1966, it's over Guam, it's about 1:30 in the morning, so there's no sunlight, it's completely dark out. And this B-52 pilot and co-pilot see this light approaching the aircraft. It gets closer and closer, it gets larger and larger, and it turns out that it is a very large, you could call it a mothership. You mentioned city in the sky, between conservatively a quarter mile to a half mile in diameter. Mark did a sketch right next to me for his little lecture This is what the craft actually looked like. So keep in mind, we're talking a quarter to a half mile in diameter here. And you can see on the outer rim of this craft, there are these slats that, according to Mark, look like bypass doors that you would see at O'Hare Airport, where a 737 would go in for maintenance. You have these bypass doors. That's kind of what these things look like as a side view.
So you're saying that's the B-1 bomber?
This is a B. Yeah, that's a B-52 right there. And they did about 2 orbits around this craft itself. He also mentioned that on the upper dome of the craft that you can see here, there were 27 transparent levels that they could see. They actually counted 27 levels. And as these bypass doors started rotating faster and faster, eventually what happened is very interesting. This craft, according to the B-52 pilot, took off like a spark on a grinding wheel and then opened up some type of portal where they could see blue sky and clouds. They went into that portal, and then that portal trickled back to a completely black sky again. And that's what we have here in the next illustration that Mark had done. Here's the B-52 on the right lower part here, and then the craft opening up some type of portal. These are the clouds, and this whole area here would all be blue sky.
So it's at nighttime.
It's at nighttime.
Rips through, another plane, another dimension.
Correct.
And you can see the other side of blue sky and white clouds.
They could clearly see blue sky and white clouds. This is 1966, yep.
There's theories that these UFOs maybe are not extraterrestrial at all. They're just interdimensional and they live right around us at all times.
This could be one application for that, correct. Mm-hmm.
And this is coming from military eyewitness, not like just, this is our own people, our own military stating this.
These are our own Air Force B-52 pilots making these statements, and we should really take heed because, you know, they're putting their lives at stake and they're protecting all of us, right? The national security of the United States depends on how well they do their job because they're carrying nuclear weapons on board. So if we can't trust the statements from our own Air Force pilots, who can we trust?
Incredibly, in the middle of our interview with Michael Schratt, we were interrupted by a military helicopter that was hovering over our home in Los Angeles. What was the significance? We're not exactly sure. It seemed that they're curious at what we're doing. Shortly after they left, we conducted our interview again.
Sure, let's talk about some Navy programs. The U.S. government absolutely is involved in low aspect ratio. You could call them flying wing configurations. You could call them craft that have no wings. It's a low aspect ratio aircraft, meaning that it's almost lenticular, almost saucer shape is what we're talking about here. So time frame here is 1943, and this is what's called the Chance Vought XF5U-1. So it's a twin radial engine, tractor propeller, twin engine, and you can see there's virtually no wings on this. So this could be a carrier-based aircraft for the Navy. Was not really a successful program. It was canceled because this is getting into the time frame where propeller-driven aircraft were being phased out and were being replaced by jet aircraft. So it was in that transition period, but it's just to demonstrate that they were actually building
Flying saucer.
and beginning, the beginning of these low aspect ratio, lenticular, circular flying wing configurations. It definitely was going on. They were building these prototypes.
Do you think some of these craft could have been mistaken for UFOs? Because
Absolutely.
The propellers
Absolutely.
visible to the eye.
Yeah.
And you see these discs off at a distance, voila, the flying saucer.
If this was flying at 10,000 feet altitude, it would look like a flying saucer. You could mistake it for something like that. So absolutely yes. And in fact, they encourage that. They encourage the concept that there's an alien aspect to all this to hide their own programs. And they encourage that. It's their job to do that.
So they want to muddy the waters.
They want to muddy the waters. Correct. So you've got man-made craft, you've got possible ET craft, you've got interdimensional, you've got craft that could be from a pre-existing high-tech civilization already here. So it's this multi-headed hydra, and it's all being mixed up. And so that's what they've actually done here.
Why do you think did they discontinue this program for jet?
Well, okay, look, if you look at this here, you've got this long drive shaft connected to the propellers that goes back to the engines embedded into the quote-unquote fuselage of this. You've got all this linkage and mechanical. It's just too complex. It's just too complex. And you know, a lot of these programs, they're born in a world where we don't hear about it too much. We're not gonna hear about it, and if it's a failure, they just sweep it under the carpet. So there's so much that we don't know, so much of our history that's been completely lost. Here are some of the original wind tunnel test models. V173, XF5U-1. So they absolutely were doing this. You always want to prove it out in a wind tunnel first. And then we can discuss some of the other version here. This is getting into more of the V173, XF5U-1. Oh, these have been around for a while now. So this is, again, 1943 time frame. But they didn't just stop there. They kept on going. This is Project 1794. And this is also called Project Blue Book. Now this is a Mach 3 interceptor with VTOL capability. So this thing could take off vertically.
Did they develop the prototype on this?
Well, it was partially built. We don't know exactly how far it went, but this part was canceled. This is, 1955 to 1962 frame. It wasn't declassified until the 1990s from my good friend Jack Pickett, who saw 3 of these at MacDill Air Force Base back in 1967.
Bob Lazar be mistaking this craft for the sports model?
Well, I don't believe that Bob Lazar saw anything like this at quote-unquote S4. So this is a different bird altogether because this is using conventional turbojet engines. This is not Element 115. So this is a completely different family of aircraft. And then we move on to the well-known VZ9 Avro car, which was a failure from the get-go. And you could see that they would pin everything on this and make the claim that this is just unsuccessful and the money dried out and there's just nothing to man-made flying saucers. But we all know that that's not particularly accurate.
Did that to self-sabotage the whole flying saucer idea, and look how
part of it, yes,
it is.
Yes.
Look how this isn't functional. We can't master it, so let's drop the whole thing.
Right,
as
right.
Far as we know. But this one I really like here. This
Sure.
Is something that is
yeah.
pretty amazing.
Yep. So it's just demonstrate that they were working on dish-shaped craft, multiple different propulsion systems. But the real question is, what do they have now? What propulsion systems are they using now? And what cover stories are they using as well?
So our own military is having close encounters with these craft, even the size of over a mile long. Now, let's move over to the Sonora Triangle. Russia has their own experiences within the military in regards to UFOs as well, right?
That's correct, and we should set the stage here. So between 1989 and 1990, there were at least 5,000 eyewitnesses in the Belgium area that saw multiple black triangles. They had tubes, pipes, and cylinders on the bottom. They had red lights that detached from them. And there were just thousands of eyewitnesses that saw these. Now, concurrently in Russia, and this comes by way of my friend Antonio Huneeus, genius researcher, was able to access his collection. And I've got a report here, and this is an actual illustration. And I'll just kind of go over this one statement here. It talks about secret UFO 1990 when a triangular-shaped identified craft landed close to a military installation in Samara and destroyed an air defense radar warning unit. So here you can see on the left-hand side of this illustration the black triangle and then this beam of energy that basically rendered the radar unit completely inoperable. So was it a hostile intent? Was it one of ours? It's interesting because it matches the time frame of the Belgium Triangle wave, so they could be connected.
When we talk about a threat, a UFO threat, and extraterrestrial in nature, I believe the TR3-B's ours. So, developed by reverse engineered. So if there's a threat coming from the TR3-B, I got a feeling that's man-made in a way, and it's possibly, maybe it's ours, built in our own private corporation.
Just go by what the eyewitnesses talked about. They talk about hearing a low-frequency electrical humming noise. They discuss the tubes, pipes, and cylinders on the bottom of the aircraft. This was tracked on F-16 radar, so they were able to get it on their radar, and it was a case where the Belgian government actually released the radar tapes, which is something that we don't generally get here in the United States. But it just points to the fact that what was going on in Belgium was also going on in Russia as well, same time frame. This is a very interesting foreign case that I got from Antonio Hunes. Was able to access his collection. We've heard about the boomerangs, we've heard about the triangles, we've heard about 300 feet per side and larger, but this is an interesting case because not only did it come with a 3-page article, but also you can see here platforma. So we're talking about flying platforms here. The article states that this is vintage 1972 time frame. This thing was at least 300 feet wide and 3 soccer fields long. So we're talking mothership size here. But what I want to point out is, not only did the Belgium Triangle eyewitness report this, but the Hudson Valley Boomerang eyewitnesses reported this as well. This strange oil refinery understructure of these craft, and you can see that here, all of the lights here, almost like Manhattan in the sky, with all these pipes and cylinders and tubes and what look like kind of like a Midas muffler plant. We're getting the same understructure on multiple different craft from multiple different locations.
So, how many people witnessed this thing if it's the size of a city?
It was ongoing for at least a year. So this is something that was seen by multiple eyewitnesses. And I just want to point out that they're all talking about this tubes, pipes, and cylinders on the bottom of these craft. It's happening over and over again in multiple different countries even. So it's important to point that out.
Just because there's tubes and lights and things that seem almost man-made doesn't mean that extraterrestrial apparatus could resemble man-made construction as well.
Well, what would be the purpose of it though, right? I mean, there's got to be a purpose for the pipes and the tubes, and it almost looks like storage tanks. So my guess is this could be an entire superconductor that's super chilled down to very low temperature, and they're using liquid nitrogen to do that. That's why you see these pipes and tubes. And then circling back to our original discussion about the Blue Room at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, if you want to know where the bodies are at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, just look for the cryo tanks and the cryo pipes for the liquid nitrogen for the cooling. There's your bodies right there.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this thing is a huge superconductor craft developing its own? Possibly,
yeah. But you got to think, look at the physical evidence. What would be the purpose of all these pipes and tubes? They're moving liquid through there. Why would they be moving liquid? Because in the 80s we talked about these superconductors, and it's starting to get into that time frame there. So it looks like they're using liquid nitrogen as a cooling device for these things. That's what it looks like on my end. That's what it's looking like. Gentlemen, this is one of my favorite legendary stories within ufology. I'll try to do this in a nutshell here. So time frame is 1973. Jackie Gleason and Richard Nixon are at a charity golf outing. That part of the story is absolutely true. I've got the newspaper clippings, I've got the photographs of Jackie Gleason in his golf cart driving Richard Nixon to the different parts of the golf course. So that happened, no question about it. That is true. Okay, so as the story unfolds here, as the legend goes, somewhere around the 9th hole, the subject of UFOs came up. Now, keep in mind, Jackie Gleason was a huge UFO fan. He has a massive library that was donated to University of Miami. That's there, you can access it today. And he had a house which was built in the shape of a flying saucer called the Mothership. So he actually lived in a flying saucer. At the time he was living in Miami. So right around the 9th hole, the subject of UFOs came up, as it often does. And so Jackie turns to the president and says, President Nixon, can you help me out here? I mean, you know I have an interest in UFOs. I have a huge library. Can you tell me anything? You're the president. Can you tell me anything? So he turns to Jackie and he says, Jackie, if you can be available later this evening, I might be able to help you with that. So they finish up the golf outing. Jackie drives back to Miami, and he goes to bed. And then around 12 midnight, there's a knock on the door. So Jackie gets up, he goes to the door, he opens up the door, and it's Richard Nixon, President Nixon, in Jackie Gleason's doorway. And he said, Jackie, why don't you come follow me? So Jackie gets into the passenger side. Now, keep in mind, Richard Nixon drove his own car without the Secret Service A lot of people think that that's impossible, it would never happen. Apparently Richard Nixon had a habit of doing this thing, so it's feasible. So they drive from Miami, which is where Jackie was living, to Homestead Air Force Base. They get up to the guard area. The guard recognizes the president and is shocked. He waves him through. They go to the far end of Homestead Air Force Base, and Richard Nixon ushers Jackie Gleason into this large hangar facility that is very open, okay? And on the left-hand side of the wall of this open facility, there are a minimum of 6 vintage Coke freezers. Each Coke freezer has a plexiglass or transparent cover on it, revealing the mangled remains of a multiple childlike burned, quote-unquote, humanoid-looking aliens. There are at least 6 of them. So you can think, Jackie Gleason, I mean, he's shocked. He's surprised at what he's seeing. Now, on the other side of this hangar facility, near the other wall, were multiple blue bins. In each bin are the debris of, we don't know which crash retrieval it's from. It could have been Kingman. It could have been Aztec. Could have been Roswell, we don't know. But there were multiple blue bins, and here's this blue again, right? We keep on hearing the color blue associated with UFOs and UFO technology. So we've got Project Blue Book, we've got the blue bins, we've got the blue berets, we've got the blue room. I mean, blue just keeps on popping up within ufology. There's some type of connection here. So Jackie Gleason, he sees the bodies, he sees parts of the craft, he sees the debris. You can imagine his head is spinning. So he gets back in Richard Nixon's car. They drive from Homestead Air Force Base back up to Miami. And according to Jackie Gleason's ex-wife, Beverly McKittrick, he plopped down on the couch and he was a changed man from that point forward. It had completely shooken his reality. So what evidence do we have to back up any of this? So I pulled up some of the original. Now keep in mind, this is tabloid newspaper clippings to somewhat verify this. We really can't call it proof, but you're not going to see another original copy. So here's extra news. This is July 14th, 1987. Jackie Gleason UFO shocker. I saw bodies of dead aliens at top secret Air Force Base back in 1987. That's when they published this. So what did Jackie Gleason really see? Is it a true story? We'll move on to the next one here. So this is New York Post, Monday, June 29th, 1987. Jackie Gleason and the space aliens. They go into this particular encounter. They talk about Beverly McKittrick. Now, she was going to publish a manuscript, a biography about Jackie called The Great One. And she was going to include this story in that biography. It was never published, though. So somehow we've got to get a copy of that. However...
So you're saying the New York Post at page 6 covered up the story? They had some information and didn't let it get out?
Oh no, they let this get out, but it's the biography that was never published. Her biography that she was writing about her husband, called The Great One, that was never published. Now, if we could get a copy of that original manuscript, it would help to prove the case. However, this is where the story gets interesting. Okay, so this is Homestead Air Force Base. We talked a little bit earlier that there appears to be multiple repositories where they keep the debris, the bodies, the crash retrievals, the craft itself. So one's Homestead Air Force Base, the other is Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, we've got Langley Air Force Base, and then MacDill Air Force Base, Tampa, Florida. So again, it appears to be that they don't have a single point failure here. They keep a certain library where the photographs and motion picture film reels are stored. They keep it at these different locations so that they don't have a single point failure. That appears to be the case.
So, Michael, I appreciate you coming in.
Sure, no
giving
problem.
Us the information,
no problem.
Because let me tell you, your work, what you've been doing, the information, it's important to get the word out.
It's important to maintain an important part of our national history.
Well, you've got the archive and some things I've never seen before. I'm sure the world hasn't seen it. So again, I appreciate it.
Oh, good. No problem.
Thanks for coming out, man, because the information, there's a wealth in there, man.
Yep.
Let's just go down the rabbit hole here for a second. And let's just assume this is some sort of adversarial or foreign technology.
Most of the more than 120 incidents over the past 2 decades are not from the U.S. military or other advanced U.S. government technology.
right in front of me, it just disappears. Disappeared. Like gone.
To be clear, he's referring to this giant object as a tic tac, because he said it was shaped like one.
We're in, that we don't know what these things are, and they might even be extraterrestrial, that's worse.